Welcome to this week's Friday special. I'm Vikas Majid Khan. We're talking about the United States foreign policy and its effects that are being felt all across the world. Let's begin the conversation. We've been joined by Dr. Amna Mehmood and Dr. Shahryar Khan for this conversation. Thank you, sir, for being here. Sir, let's begin with the North Korean deal. First of all, we had this letter that was written by Donald Trump to Kim Jong-un. Have you gone through that letter? A lot of criticism is coming forth as a result of that letter. A lot of people are calling it a very amateurish letter being written, and that is not how heads of state communicate with each other. What's your take on this particular letter?
If you look at Donald Trump and his track record of diplomacy, he is a bit unorthodox there. Most of the diplomacy is done through Twitter, so I would believe that letter is still far better than the Twitter. So sometimes even his own staff, find it difficult, to defend him. Sometimes he takes policy decision or a statement on a Twitter, and then the diplomats have to defend him, and they don't know what's going on in his mind. So this is a kind of a situation they are dealing with, and even his State Department is dealing with. But if you look at the letter, it makes sense that why United States is pulling out. For instance, in the testimony to the House of Congress of Mike Pompeo, he said that we don't want a bad deal with them. They backed out of the Iranian nuclear deal, and now they don't want to enter another deal which is not according to their terms. So they're making themselves clear, and this guy is considered as a hawkish in that administration. What they're doing is they want complete, they want a treaty or any kind of a deal with them, but on their own terms. And that's why they say that we don't want a deal from which we tomorrow will back out, like the way they did from the Iranian nuclear deal. So they have their own justification for that. But diplomatically speaking, it was considered as, a win-win for all, that, North Korea, after so long time, they're coming together, for the summit, and they'll meet, and probably there will be peace in the region. But that's now gone, and countries, especially other major powerful countries of the world, like France, Germany, and they are also concerned that how the United States would continue its international affairs, because it's backing out of the deals. It's not going, it's not availing the opportunities, and they're quite worried themselves. For instance, on the Iranian nuclear deal, you would find the European Union viewpoint a bit different, quite different from the United States. So it's the case with this North Korea. For North Korea, United States is has taken a very strict measures, or let's say strict diplomacy, coercive diplomacy. Even in this letter, he has again referred to the use of the nuclear weapons, that they have so much nuclear weapons that which they don't want to use.
Yeah,
so
God
it's a veiled threat, yeah, God forbid. They don't want to use. So it's a coercive diplomacy.
Right.
It's a diplomacy that you say, okay, you have to behave yourself, otherwise we have these options. We can come and get you. And
so it's now changing from the carrot and stick policy to stick policy. There is no carrot left anymore.
Okay.
Why would, like, as you just yourself has mentioned, that it is now moving from a coercive, it's moving towards a coercive policy rather than one based on cooperation. Dr. Amna, is that going to work? Does a coercive policy work in international affairs, especially in a multipolar world which is now emerging? It is not a unipolar world anymore. If you look at the rise of Russia and the influence that Russia now exerts within the Middle East, America is now pretty much sidelined as far as international affairs are concerned because of their recent debacles with the walking out of the Paris Climate Accord, the Trans-Partnership, Pacific Partnership Accord, and so on, many others, also, of course, the Iran nuclear deal, and now then backtracking away from the Korean meeting, that summit that was scheduled in Singapore. How do you analyze this?
I think that it is very unfortunate that U.S. has, they are going to miss that opportunity, because standoff was for quite some time, and the whole efforts were failed, and this I think Americans were not expecting that North Korea would come to the deal, and they would be ready to sit on the negotiation table. And when they agreed, they were not prepared to deal with them. And that's why Mr. Trump wrote this letter. This letter is very stereotyped. He has threatened his boosted his ability to strike and then countered their ability and then asked them to that they missed this opportunity. And he, I think that he referred to some of the statement of North Korean leader. But it was really a missed opportunity on the part of United States in the wake of the whole regional politics, where Russia is with North Korea, China is still with North Korea, and Japan is in the standoff position against North Korea, being the US ally. So I think that if the situation would be complicated, then at least there would be some possibility of a regional war. If North Korea would keep it as a threat from US. And US was having this opportunity to take this time to get the unification of North Korea and South Korea again, which was actually divided by the US in 1950. And they could facilitate regional peace forever. It was the opportunity for Mr. Trump to take this credit. That
yes, Mr. Trump was very hopeful that he might get the Nobel Prize for his efforts in North Korea. That seems to have gone up in
but
smoke.
he missed
Dr.
that.
Shahryar, what's your opinion about that?
Probably, yeah, he can expect that, and you wonder, probably he'll get it. We have seen in the past, President Obama got a Nobel Prize
for doing nothing.
And in the past, we have seen some people, these Nobel Peace Prizes, sometimes they are political, so they can get one. But coming to that, North Korean point, North Korea is also known for its unpredictability. For instance, the very announcement of dismantling the nuclear program and coming to talks with the United States, it also seems very unpredictable, on their part. And even after that, they have issued certain statements of hatred towards United States. Or for instance, there was a meeting of one diplomat in Singapore before that, and they didn't show up. This is what United States alleges. So this unpredictability is also on part of the North Korean, and the unpredictability is also on the part of the United States. But I think this time around, what the United States sees is that probably he is capitulating to the pressure. There's internally North Korea is facing huge poverty problem there. They need investment, and this is what even its chairman had said when they met South Korea, that we need such kind of a development. So they're probably desperate for that, and the United States now sensing that they are now ready mentally and they're desperate. So why not get a deal which suits us? Since they have an experience of a deal with Iran, which they don't like, so they believe that why not to have a deal where we are pretty sure
There's
that
another problem, Dr. Shahryar. The problem is that in terms of perception, many times it has been perceived by the North Koreans and others around who are observing the political shenanigans going on. The deal that the US was offering North Koreans was very similar to the deal that they offered Muammar Gaddafi.
Libya, yeah.
And then the fate of the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi is for everyone to see. Isn't that also a very major cause for concern for the North Koreans?
Yeah, but it is. But there is a bit difference. If you look at the North Korean case, they said that it will be one of like a Libyan model, and which President Trump then denied that it won't be like that. And this is what the Libyan deal. It deters the dictators, from going to their deal. Because after that deal, what happened to Muammar Gaddafi, that is what they see, that probably then the United States will back out and it will support the proxies there. But the situation in North Korea and the situation in Libya are a bit different. The contexts are a bit different. For instance, in the case of Libya, West and United States worked with Muammar Gaddafi after that. But Arab Spring happened. And when Arab Spring happened, then they changed their course. In North Korea, we don't see that. Probably there is a kind of a spring going on, or there is an uprising. But this is also there, that United States can change a course, and this is widely believed that even the Arab Spring or that resistance in Libya, it was supported by United States, or United States instigated that. So this is what dictators or authoritarian governments, they fear that United States they would denuclearize us today. So when we don't have nuclear weapons or any kind of a deterrence tomorrow, they will support let's say the democratic forces so called, and then they will oust them. And this is what had scared them, and that's why that diplomacy, that cooperation, that goodwill it evaporated, after that, and there are other statements came from the Korean side and then from his side, and that environment of trust that was building, it got affected.
Well, despite having said that, the North Koreans made a big pomp and show of dismantling one of their nuclear tunnels. That's on the record, and they said that this was our goodwill gesture to prove that we are sincere. And at the same time, this happens almost simultaneously while Mr. Donald Trump was backing out of the deal. Dr. Amna, do you think that increasingly now across the world, the Americans are being viewed as unreliable partners for most countries that they deal with?
Yeah, it's going to be. But I just want to add to what Shahryar said here. The case of Libya in Korea is totally different because Korea is at very advanced stage in developing its nuclear weapons, and they have tried at least 6 times. They tested their weapon and nuclear weapon, and they have intercontinental ballistic missiles too. They have tested also. So I think that United States would not dare to start another nuclear war with them. And as Shahryar mentioned, they are equally unpredictable as Mr. Trump is. So you never know when he decided to, Mr. Young decide to fire, and he will. So another case that Libya was a Muslim country that was not supported by any of the other country.
Well, Korea is a communist country, which is even worse than being Muslim.
Even then, in 2016, you see in 2017, they were having bad relations with China, but China assured their support to North Korea if there would be any standoff with US, and same statements came from the Russia too. And this is they are sitting in Pacific region, and that region is area of influence of Russia and China more than the US. So I think that the situation is totally different, and the US will not dare to do the same as they did with the Libyan leaders.
But again, the unpredictability factor is always there, so anything can happen. Let's also talk about the Iran deal, sir, now. Do you think that the Europeans will be able to meet the Iranian demands? We had Mr. Mike Pompeo set out 12 demands on the Iranians, and then we had the Iranians come up with 5 demands that they made to the Europeans. Do you think that this is going to end up in a disastrous breakdown of the entire deal? The Europeans will not be able to maintain their end of the deal, and the Iranians will have an excuse to start enriching uranium again, and then the Israelis are going to start another showdown, which we've seen recently happening in the Middle East. So a lot of people are perceiving that there might be a showdown or a war between Israel and Iran anytime soon. What would happen then?
Well, if you look at the whole scenario here, European Union, they want, because their companies would be the one who would suffer the most in this. Some American companies would also suffer, but mostly it would be European companies who would suffer if this collapse. Now, there are alternatives which China, Russia, France, Germany, these countries are trying to restore or somehow salvage this nuclear deal. And that's why even Iran is maintaining, still abiding by that deal, and even International Agency of Atomic Energy, they also said that Iran is abiding by the deal. So what they hope that even Iran wants this deal to work out, because they know the consequences would not be good for Iran, because Iran also desperately needs investment. It wants to sell its oil and to develop its country. Now,
not just develop its country, I would say, also have influence in the region. It wants to be the leader of the Middle East.
That's always in their foreign policy, that that they will consider themselves to a regional power or to have some influence on some groups or countries. Now, what United States wants from Iran, it also wants to include missiles now in that deal.
Yes, they want to stop the long-range
ballistic missiles. They should also be included. It should be completely like de-weaponized, from all the lethal weapons, because ballistic missile can also deliver nuclear weapons, and it can also hit Israel. So they also want them to, so they want to expand the ambit of this treaty, if there is any treaty, if they want to solve that. What European Union can do, they can always, fall in line with the United States. At the end, it happens like that. So they cannot go their way with Iran.
But that's not always true, sir, because, Madam Amna, if you'd like to answer this question, when we saw during the Cuban crisis, the Europeans, they bypassed US sanctions so that they could deal with Cuba, and they did deal with Cuba. Many European companies continued working with Cuba when Cuba was heavily sanctioned by the US. And again, now this time also, we are seeing that the Europeans are trying to maneuver in the United Nations or having some secondary mechanism in place that can bypass the American sanctions when it comes to European companies working in Iran. And so there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. What are your expectations? Do you think that the Europeans will be able to save the deal with Iran, or do you think it's dead in the water?
I think that your analysis is right. European Union has taken different stance in many of the cases, and rather the reason for developing European Union was that they wanted to have their own lines, and they want to revive the greater Europe. And they exhibited this at number of occasions. They are having direct dealing with Chinese companies on nuclear issues and nuclear supplies, and United States blocked that. They have put sanctions on them in 1990s, but European Union continued that, and the same as you are referring to Cuban crisis. And if you see that in Iraq war in 2003, European Union maintained a different stance, except Britain, and Britain is no more in European Union now. So I think that European Union is going to maintain not only that stance, but they are having they would try to use their leverage to continue that Iranian nuclear deal, and they would try to convince US. And apparently indications are there that US would go back, because this is the time Mr. Trump is creating rhetoric, but he cannot pull out so simply as he is doing through these tweets, because for that purpose he need ratification from the US Senate, and UN Senate is not giving such indications that they are backing Mr. Trump.
Well, the Iranians have also asked the Europeans to go into the United Nations Security Council and protest, lodge a protest against the US for unilaterally withdrawing from the deal. Do you think that the Europeans are going to be able to do that?
I think that it is not possible. There may be a debate in in UN Security Council, but that debate cannot lead to. It could stand as a pressure tactic against the United States, but they are maintaining veto power, and they would not allow any of the resolution from UN Security Council.
I want to
Please.
Well, you cited the Cuban crisis, but the Cuban context was a bit different. Even Iranian context was a bit similar in a sense that certain countries could do trade with Iran, even there were sanctions. For instance, Turkey.
For instance,
India, China, they had got a waivership.
Well,
they were waived.
I'm glad you brought this up. Yeah, please.
Even today, even India wants to salvage this deal because they have built a Chabahar port, and they want they are also worried now what would happen to it. I think there is always a way. Iran has always even under the sanctions they have done trade with these countries, but that was not enough. So was the case with Cuba. That was not enough. Why this time the European would fall behind the United States? It's because of the resurgence of Russia in the region. Russia has reasserted itself in the region, and Europeans are more worried about Russians than anything else. And this is what always United States can play on their fear. They have always done that. That's why in the first place they had NATO against Soviet Union, Russia, and within Soviet Union now, Tsarist Russia, Soviet Union now, today's Russia, Federation of Russia. It has always been, Europe has always considered it as a threat on its continent, and it has always been one of the big players on that continent for so long. So the fear of the Russia, the rise of the Russia, it's what scares the European Union, and this is what going to benefit United States in the region, and they will fall behind United States in this. Of course, there will be some kind of a waiver to some companies, but mostly big deals, it couldn't be happen. And you were right in that probably the next episode of this would be maybe clearing the way for Israel, but Israel itself, it wants United States to do its job. There's that
I'm glad you brought up the Israeli angle to this entire debate, this conversation. there's a lot of Russian influence in Israel. There's a lot of American influence in Israel. Israel has both the US and the Russians very close to its heart, I would say. If you look at the budding relationship with the Russians and the Israelis, recently it was Netanyahu who went flying to meet Putin when things got a little hairy in Syria. And it was Putin who asked the Iranians to calm down when a number of their sites were attacked. Over 7 Iranian soldiers were killed by the Israelis. Now, if you look at the influence that Russia is now that is exerting within the region, does it show that American policies under Mr. Trump's administration are isolating the U.S. more and more internationally as a result of those bad decisions?
You're right that now they have a challenger in the Middle East. But if you look at, there has always been now an alliance has been formed. For instance, Russia has aligned itself with Syria and Iran there. But it's not aligned with the Arab countries. Arab countries are
but Russia is not non-aligned with the Israelis either. There is a huge number of Russian Jews that Israel has taken in. In fact, Russian is like a second language in Israel.
Yeah.
So then,
but not like Syria. For instance, if you compare it with Syria, in Syria they have a base. In Israel they don't have a base. The only base they have from where they can control Mediterranean. And that's of strategic importance to them. That's why they came to the rescue of Bashar al-Assad regime. So they have chosen the sides, but it's diplomacy. Strategic alliances, sometimes they are transactional for a time being. For instance, Iran and United States worked together in Iraq. So they were enemies, but they worked together. Sometimes these things can happen. But the presence of Russia in the region, it's a counterweight to the hegemony of the United States. It had been in the Cold War as well. Now, when Russia is back to this region, and especially for Syria and now with Iran, we can see that United States hegemony is a bit counterbalanced by Russia there, and they will not have whatever they want. They would not have their say in everything, and they would have an opposition from states like Iran and Syria with the help of Russia as well.
And China, don't forget.
And China. China is a bit different. China doesn't involve itself strategically.
Well, if you look at what's happening, there is also a new changing dynamic, whereas when we deal in oil, when Iran wants to sell its oil to China, for example, it does not have to do it in dollars. There's a shift that's happening, intellectual shift that's happening, a paradigm shift that's happening of oil transactions across the world, moving away from the petrodollar and maybe coming into other currencies. First of all, it's the yuan that is the first key contender for challenging the petrodollar's status in international affairs. That is going to be very interesting to watch.
The Chinese president has a big vision. He's very ambitious, and one of his vision is that to make his currency as an international currency, and this is why wherever they have their projects, they want the governments there to accept their currency as a legal tender. They have even asked Pakistan to do so, and we have given them permission in Gwadar now. So this is their dream, that because they say you do trade with us, why use dollar? Why not our currency? And this creates trust. The currency, it's a matter of trust, that okay, any currency is a currency, but it depends on the trust. So it will create a trust in China, and China as a power or economic power, it will create trust. Why people like dollar? Why euro could not replace dollar? Because people still doubt probably euro project is successful or not. What if it falls apart? What would happen? So they don't even trust dollars.
Well, it's
everybody
linking
trusts
dollar to the oil business.
Yeah.
That's what the reason is. That's why it's called the petrodollar. That's the reason.
I believe it's the power of the United States behind it. The way that the hegemony of the United States is behind the dollar, and everybody is seeing that. So this is one of the reasons. But slowly, you're right. It's not only that United States is losing
well,
hegemony.
When you talk about
hegemony,
when
it's
we're
also
talking about
economically,
Iran selling its oil exports, I mean, Iran might be compelled under the kind of relationship that Iran and US are moving towards. Iran would be compelled to use some other currency to sell its oil, and it has to sell its oil, because what else are they going to do?
If United States distances itself from so many countries or pushes them away, somebody else would take them in their ambit. And China is actually posturing to that. That those countries where United States and Western countries, they don't do business. They have done it in Africa as well. So if they don't, because they have so many concerns and there's so much politics involved in West, in the Western countries regarding dealing with these countries. So China doesn't care about human rights policy. It doesn't care about, the economic, the security situation. It takes it into its ambit and it creates its influence. So we see a new world order, a regional order, Chinese order in place, and China would become, the big player, and has become a big player.
Already is a big player.
Big player in the region. So these countries like Iran, even in our country, we look up to China then. So we look east kind of a policy. Even countries like India, they want to maintain their trade relationship with China, though they want to counter them in certain ways. But even then, so we see that a new model or a new player is here, where countries which are rejected by the West, they can look up to.
Well, it's interesting. We also have Mr. Pompeo addressing Congress, and he had something to say about Pakistan as well. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has informed Congress that American officials are treated badly in Pakistan. And they're also adding that Washington released far fewer funds to Pakistan in 2018 and may give even less next year. How do you view this particular statement by Mr. Mike Pompeo and the whole mindset in the U.S. vis-a-vis Pakistan? So if you could comment on, on these developments.
It was very obvious. Their reaction should have come earlier. It's a bit late, I think. Because Pakistan, I think that this is a problem in treatment of Pakistani authorities. They should treat all diplomats across the board under the Vienna Convention. And when they were extending these extraordinary facilities to the US, and they manipulated and misused all these facilities, that's why they have been withdrawn. Obviously, US is perturbed on that, and they have to be. And that is actually the reaction what US did earlier with the Pakistani diplomats in Washington. So I don't think that Americans can claim that Pakistan is maltreating. They have been maltreating before that, and without any provocation there in Washington. Here was a provocation, that the murder of that child in an accident.
This is apart from the murder that they're talking about. They're making a general accusation that all their diplomats and all the people working for the Americans in Pakistan are treated badly by the Pakistani government.
Actually, Pakistan has withdrawn all those
facilities. Do you agree with this perception, though?
I think it's very natural. When you give them extraordinary facilities, they are expecting more and more. And it is their mantra to say, do more, do more, do more. And at least there should be some limit. They are ultimately not Pakistanis. They are diplomats, and they should be confined to their affairs. And it is rightly done by Pakistan. I wonder why they have extended all these facilities to them earlier.
Well, then that's a tit-for-tat response. You're asking for the Pakistani diplomats to be treated the same way in the US, ma'am.
They have already been treated like that.
No, this is new. This is a very, very latest, I mean, it's a new development in the recent months we've seen that. But do you think that this all indicates that Islamabad's once close relationship with Washington has ended, and that Pakistan is now being viewed as an adversary in the US circles?
That is again a very old phenomena. For the last 2 years, when Mr. Trump is there in office, we have been seeing all that Pakistan is no more friend, it is frenemy. And it has been happening in the last days of Barack Obama also, when they thought that they can withdraw from this region, so they don't need Pakistan anymore. It was their calculation, so that it could not be proved right at that time, but it is their assessment that Pakistan is no more required now. And whenever Americans decide that, they behave in the same way. And in Washington, they put restrictions on Pakistani diplomats first. They wanted to provoke Pakistan to come in the same direction, because it's that is a practice. You have been witnessing the treatment of Russian diplomat in Britain, and tit-for-tat action by the Russia and other from other European Union capitals. You have been seeing that. So this is a practice in diplomacy, and it happens. Pakistan waited for long and then reacted. You see that Pakistan reacted in May, and they did in February. So I think that Pakistan did appropriate action. And America, if you want to please Americans, I think you are never able to do that. Because it's good to make relations on principles. diplomacy is based on Vienna Convention, and that should be observed. And Pakistan is not withdrawing those facilities under Vienna Convention. They are withdrawing only those which were given beyond that as a special treatment to the US. And since we are not most allied ally now, so US diplomats do not deserve.
Very sad state of affairs, I might add.
Yeah.
Well, we have
But-
Miss
but
Alice
these are
Wells
the
working in Pakistan, and they're working on implementing President Trump's South Asia policy. Again, another disastrous, miserable failure of a policy for the South Asian region, which includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Dr. Saab, in your opinion, what do you think is really the problem with the South Asian policy that doesn't seem to be going down very well in this region?
Well, you know, policies, all kinds of policies are there to achieve the objectives or foreign policy objectives. They can always be criticized, and in a lot of cases, they don't produce the desired results. We have seen the policy, United States doing operations in using force and doing operations in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Did they produce the desired results? No, not always. So even this policy may not produce the desired results. What they want actually is that every president has his own strategy when they come to the office, his own team. And they have clubbed Pakistan together with the Afghan problem this time, because in the past when they tried, Pakistan protested that we treat us separately. This time around, they didn't listen to us, and they believe that if we want to solve Afghanistan, we have to deal with Pakistan. But they're wrong in a sense that there are certain other players in that country, in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not a country where only United States is there, or Pakistan has certain influence there. Regional countries there, they have their own interest in that region. They have their own policies. Especially recently, Russia has taken so much interest in that region. And when Russia is there, it means something then. So I think blaming Pakistan, only Pakistan, I think that it won't work, such a policy, because it means that if only Pakistan is responsible for all the mayhem in Afghanistan, then it's really an easy problem to deal with, because you just have to deal with one country, and you could have done that already. There are ways of dealing with, for instance, they could have rewarded us, they could have, sanctioned us, they could have done so much, but it's not the case, because it's not just one country you're dealing with. And I believe that even Afghans believe that, and recently they're not even blaming Pakistan for everything, because they also realize that it's not only the interest of Pakistan in Afghanistan. There are so many players in that country which may be working at cross purposes, and that's why it's really hard to achieve peace there. Even the same formula, for instance, United States has been saying, Pakistan has been saying that there should be a dialogue and reconciliation process with the Taliban. But today, Daesh is more of a lethal force than Taliban in Afghanistan. They are now in the east in Nangarhar. They are also near Kabul, and they are also gone toward the north, Kunduz and those areas. And you wonder, how did they go there? So they have now a very good footprint in that areas, and they can all the time launch attacks in Kabul, and they have shown that they can do that. So that's the biggest threat now. More than people are killed by Daesh attacks than Taliban attacks. And Taliban don't even do some certain types of attacks or attacking the common people. Now, if you want to have reconciliation, how do you reconcile with this new emergent group? It may not be new. It may be formed out of other groups, but it's also there. So it's getting worse. The situation in Afghanistan is getting worse. It's not only the Taliban. For instance, if even we are able somehow to bring Taliban back to the negotiation table and achieve some kind of agreement with them, what to do with that? So because there are so much going on in Afghanistan, it's very complex. So it's not just the one player, and that's why their South Asian strategy may not work, because they're not sending more troops to Afghanistan. They want to put pressure on other countries. They cannot change the Afghan government. They cannot change the Afghan, the incompetence going on there, the corruption going on there. The economy is still suffering. There's so much to change there which they cannot do. They haven't done in the past. So this strategy, but it's also open to change. these policies, this is sometimes, you know, some people became emotional with the policy. I believe they are just there to serve the interest, you know, that, you know, big goal of your policy. So these policies can always, you know, change or transform, and probably they'll change it. You never know with the President Trump that tomorrow he would say, we want to pack up, or tomorrow he want to say, I want to send more troops to the region, or, you know, so anything can be expected there. And but what I've, you know, after observing Trump and his team and their foreign policy, there is a bit of aggressiveness in their policy. There is a bit of coercion in their policies. They want to use their hard power. They want to use their power, the power of the United States, which they believe they have not used so far. So they want to go on a coercion side of, you know, the
So
policy.
they're going around threatening countries like
Yes.
like North Korea of nuclear.
Iran, North Korea, Pakistan. You have seen, you know,
Every
they're
place.
coercing. Yeah, they're coercing now.
So how is that going to play out for them, sir?
Well, we have to see. For instance, they are back out of the deal, so we will see the repercussions of the deal. They may have another policy for that. You know, they may
But it
have a
seems
plan
that-
for Iran.
That the
what to
policies
do
are
with
making the
Iran.
world a far more unsafer place as each day and week goes by, because we're seeing that the rhetoric has now reached, you know, epic proportions where each one is threatening the other of nuclear weapons. Is that a good sign? How are they going to be able to scale back this brinkmanship that they've started to rely on so much?
I think that is the feature of Trump's foreign policy. And if you see his election campaign, it was totally different. He promised to pull out from number of commitments across the world to minimize the defense budget and spending on defense, and doing more spending on domestic economy. And now he has changed his policy totally. He is provoking number of clashes all over the world. And as you rightly pointed out, that US is going to isolate. Actually, for South Asian policy, they want to maintain their presence here, the Americans, and they don't have any immediate justification for that. And for that purpose, they have to start certain conflict again in Afghanistan. And you see that they launch IS consciously there, though it's a lethal force, and they should have learned their experience from Iraq, but they are not learning, and they are again trying to create a counterforce to Taliban. Taliban, they were controllable to some extent, that they were confined to their own areas, and they have given them liberty to operate in some of the urban centers of Afghanistan. But I think that IS is going to be as uncontrollable as that is in Middle East. So it would be detrimental. This policy would be detrimental to the US interest. It would give more inroad to the Russia in this region, more inroad to China in this region, and as they have their stakes in this region, so they are not going to tolerate US policy here. And as US is already being set aside from in Middle East, and they are, as you mentioned, that Russia has making its direct relations with Israel, and there are a lot of sympathizers sitting in Israel. They are having more empathy naturally from towards Russians as compared to the US. So I think that Russia is going to exploit that, and they are going to have inroad in Afghanistan too. And they have leverage with Taliban once their enemy, but now they are the major supporters. Russian has been the major supporters.
So overall, in your opinion, ma'am, you think that
just let me complete.
It's
Iran,
not a zero-sum game for them,
as US has pulled out from the from Iranian nuclear deal, so Iran would be more on Russian side. So the whole area would be yeah, exactly.
So
that would be the Russian area of influence, as it used to be in the past. So ultimately, US has to roll back from this area. So their US
so the foreign policies
foreign
are going to be disastrous for
this
the
region
future of the
particularly,
US.
and for the whole Asia generally.
All right. Thank you very much for taking out the time and sharing your views with PTV World. Well, you heard the conversation, and as we like to say, please draw your own conclusions from what you've heard. On that note, it's goodbye.